Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Heidi from My Reading Life, and I'm here today to talk to you about the final books that I read in 2017, the books that I read in the last half of the month of December. I only read, let's see, how many are there here? There are 5 books here. I read 5 books since my last wrap up to the end of December, and I'll just go through them now. These are in no particular order, just as I come to them on the stack. One of the books that I finished was a romance novel. This is The Day of the Duchess Scandal and Scoundrel, Book 3 by Sarah MacClean. I love to read a romance novel every once in a while. Sarah MacClean never disappoints. She writes Regency romances that have really great dialogue and usually have a heroine that is, just feisty and doesn't take guff from anyone, and this book is no exception. In this one, a duchess has disappeared for 3 years, and when she shows back up in her duke's life, it's to demand a divorce in front of Parliament, and the duke must try to convince her that they should stay married, that their love is not beyond redemption. Great story, fun time, love Sarah MacClean. The next one to talk about is The Hidden Life of Trees, How They Feel, How They Communicate, Discoveries from a Secret World by Peter Wohlleben. This little nonfiction book was recommended to me by 2 booktubers. I believe I've mentioned before, Doris over at All D Books and Tree Hugger Spiderling. I will link their channels down below. This book was an excellent follow-up to Lab Girl. This delves more deeply into how trees communicate and if they communicate. I found it very interesting. Peter Wohlleben is a forester in Germany, and so he comes at this from a person who has worked with trees his adult life, who has been in the forest and been around trees, and also he weaves in the most recent science and his own personal experience in managing forests in Germany. And I just found this to be a delightful read. It's almost meditative. I really, really enjoyed it and found it to be a perfect complement to Lab Girl. I also completed Tell the Wolves I'm Home by Rifka Brunt. This is one of the books that I first mentioned on my 5-star TBR predictions video. This is a fiction novel about a young girl, 14-year-old girl named June, who loses her beloved uncle and godfather, and then has to figure out how to cope without him in her life. There's a mysterious stranger that turns up, and ends up being close in a way that she didn't know about with her uncle, and she becomes friends with him, and she learns more about her uncle's life and learns more about herself through this friendship. This is also a book about the friendship between sisters, and I would say it's just a book about friendships while also being about the AIDS crisis in New York City in the 80s. And it's just a fantastic novel. I started this book and then I could not put it down. I just had to know what was going to happen next. But it's also I wouldn't call it a page turner in the sense of like a thriller or an action adventure novel, but it was a page turner in the emotional sense of you just have such empathy for the characters and you really want to know how it's going to turn out for them. And it was a very heartwarming and also sad at times book. I really loved it. And I'm really glad that I read it. The next book that I wanted to talk about that I completed in December is one called The Way I Used to Be by Amber Smith. This is a YA novel that I received from my niece for Christmas. I had never heard of this novel before. I really love this cover of a dandelion blowing away in the breeze. I think it's really pretty. But this book is about a girl named Eden who, right in the beginning, and it's also on the back flap, so I'm not giving anything away, is raped by her brother's best friend as a 14-year-old. As she's home asleep in her own bed, and he comes into her bedroom and rapes her. And then we follow Eden over the next 4 years that she is in high school, and the reverberations of that act of violence and how it impacts her life, how she deals with it. Eden, this novel doesn't follow the easy path. Eden definitely has to go through some trials and tribulations, and maybe she doesn't even come out on the other side at the end of this novel the way that you might wish that she would. But I found it to be a very compelling read. It was a gut punch of a book. I thought it handled the issue of rape and how a young girl might react to that rape very realistically. It read very authentically to me, and I'm really glad I read it. I actually sat down and read this in one sitting. This was that compelling. So very good. And then the last book that I read that I want to talk about in December is my presidential biography, A Lincoln, by Ronald C. White Jr. If you may remember, I started this way back in November during Nonfiction November. And this is a chunker of a book. Let me see if I think it's 600 and, this is 600 and, where are we? 676 pages, this bad boy is. Very good presidential biography. A lot of presidential biographies are very much sort of dry facts, just a telling of straightforward facts. Whereas this was definitely more of a story, more of a narrative, although it's certainly filled with facts. The one drawback that I would say to this one is that we don't really get to know Abraham Lincoln's personal life. I mean, it's sort of referenced a few times. I mean, the author talks about, the loss of his son, Willie. He talks about sometimes his wife's political leanings or his wife's mental issues after, the son passes away and all of that sort of thing. But we never really get to see the personal life of Abraham Lincoln or delve more deeply into Mary Lincoln's life or into his children and how there's only a very few instances where he talks about how he interacts with his children. This was more about Abraham Lincoln's sort of intellectual growth. He is a self-taught man. He had very little formal schooling. He was a huge reader. Most of what he learned, he taught himself. He was consistently throughout his life educating himself, learning more about a subject. He was a thinker, and he would, ponder all sides of an issue before he would make up his mind, which led some people to believe that he was slow or indecisive, when in reality he was pulling together all of the facts before he would make a decision. And so we learn more about that side of Abraham Lincoln, and then it gets very detailed into, as he becomes president and the Civil War begins, his involvement in the day-to-day operations of the Civil War. He was very much a hands-on commander-in-chief, which I did not know. And I've just found it fascinating. I just found Abraham Lincoln as a character to be fascinating. So much in this book I didn't know. I knew the bare bones facts that you learn in school about Abraham Lincoln, but this certainly fleshed Abraham Lincoln out as a person and made me admire him even more. There's a lot of discourse around what Abraham Lincoln's true thoughts were on slavery. Was he really dedicated to freeing the slaves? And his thinking on slavery changes over the course of his life as he becomes more educated about the issue. And first and foremost, he definitely was a person that wanted to preserve the Union, but he also was a person that throughout his life abhorred slavery and thought it was a deplorable custom and practice. The problem was that he also felt that it wasn't, if the Constitution allowed for something, then no matter how abhorrent he found it, he felt it had to remain as a option. He just didn't want to see it spread. But as he became president and as the Civil War started, he realized that the country could not continue as a country with all of the states united if we still had slavery. And that process of him coming to that conclusion was very much, I believe it was this author provided the source material that made me believe his take on Abraham Lincoln's thinking on that subject. So for that reason alone, not only because this is very, very well written and interesting, I think this is worthwhile reading. It has a lot of valuable knowledge to impart to us even today in our current political climate in the United States. So highly recommend this. If you're looking to read more about Abraham Lincoln, if you're looking to read more about our political system, this is an excellent place to learn a lot about our country. So those are the books that I completed to finish out 2017 and to finish out the month of December. Overall, highly successful reading month in the month of December. Things have been rather slow with my reading so far in the month of January. My daughter is, full steam ahead on her basketball season, and that's taken up a lot of our time, as well as, being back to work after the Christmas holiday. So it hasn't been a whole lot of time for reading. I'm hoping to rectify that this weekend with the long weekend coming up. But there's lots of good books in the works, and I'm looking forward to sharing them in the weeks to come as I talk about my January reads. I hope you are all reading lots of really great books wherever you are, and I will talk to you later.